Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hafaday, Tiro, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and we are continuing our series chatting with former Peace Corps volunteers who served here in the Marianas. And our guest for this episode is Dennis Vander Tuig. Dennis, welcome back to Saipan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you were here 1974 to 1976, and you were saying before we started our show today that you were a little bit apprehensive about coming back. What were you thinking?
So I was thinking the island would not be the same, and that might be a shock, knowing that the island is not going to be the same as it was 50 years ago or 45 years ago. Thinking about the infrastructure changes and the building changes. What's lovely about coming back, and it summed it up with your welcoming me at the very beginning, is that's the number of times I've heard that phrase, welcome back, or welcome home, or whatever, welcome, made me realize the island hadn't changed, because what was really the base of the value of this island and in my experiences were the people, and reinforcing, getting to know the people again, getting to know lots of new people, getting to all the warm welcomes we've gotten around this island, simply reinforced and replicated what we got originally when we came as Peace Corps volunteers. We were so warmly welcomed, and it folded into the community on Saipan when we came. And that is what I've realized being back here is what's all about, the important part about being back here. So the island has changed, but people have changed, but the warmth of that welcome is still here. And the warmth of being embraced into the community and the culture is what we really appreciate as volunteers and as someone coming back. It's really nice.
I'm really happy to hear that.
It is.
Because, we all sometimes get nostalgic or concerned for our culture because times are changing so much, and so it's really nice to have somebody say, I've come back and the important things are very much the same.
I feared for the changing culture going on when I was here in the Peace Corps because I could see it happening, and spent my good part of my Peace Corps effort and later trying to do everything I could to help preserve culture, but also let it flourish in a way that would grow naturally and change naturally, not be forced away. I mean, I could see some things that where people were afraid were being lost. And what I've found since I've been back is there are a whole lot of interest among younger people in some of the cultural things that they feared losing. And that's very reassuring, and probably a tribute to people like you working in programs like Humanities.
Maybe more to people like you, because I think our chat today is going to be a little bit different from maybe some of the other interviews we've done in this series, because you actually stayed on and laid the groundwork for some very important agencies that are operating today related to history and the arts. But let's start with your time here as an actual Peace Corps volunteer. You were a village commissioner assistant. What was your job?
That's a good question, because it was purposely called general. They wanted generalists, whatever that meant, coming out of college. And where Peace Corps had been known for bringing in specialists, people who would design things, build things, or teach. And many of my predecessors here in the Marianas and Micronesia were teachers. They came to teach in the schools and teach English as a second language or whatever. In our case, they wanted generalists, so I was a history and philosophy major in college. And they said your job is basically to work alongside village commissioners, which also make up the municipal council with the mayor, and we'll assign you to a village commissioner, and you are to help them do whatever they need help with. It was a period of transition. Village commissioners were, in some cases, still considered kind of like the village elder, a little bit of a traditional cultural viewpoint. In other cases, they were people learning how to be a modern democracy U.S. system, probably. But I mean, it was also to become administrators in a municipal government in a different way. I had the good fortune to work for 2 village commissioners, one in San Jose, Olei, and one in San Vicente. And I had, in each of those, I had both of the things I just described. I had one of each. My village commissioner in San Vicente was one of the oldest elderly gentlemen in the village, and was still treated with deep respect, and he paid the respect back as sort of a village elder leader in all things. Whereas the person in Olei was, someone who was younger, who was trying to learn how to do, bureaucratic things that would be a part of the business. And so I kind of got a little taste of both, which was just wonderful, because it was the thing we were trying to bridge anyway. So, and each was appropriate, each was effective, and we tried to do our best to help make them effective in their jobs. Although we didn't know much more than, I certainly didn't know any more than they did, and often we were just following their lead. So we were just doing what they would like us to do.
Could I ask, since you had this unique opportunity to, as you said, learn from or work with both a traditional elder in the village and a young democratic leader, for example, how was conflict resolution? If there was a problem or disagreement, were there much problems or disagreements, or like, no, I want my road fixed? No, how did you see these kinds of uncomfortable situations being addressed back in those days?
So I saw them being worked out as in a council. I mean, they were a municipal council. One of the things that was a hot item then about what everybody was hoping for was building basketball courts in their village. They needed recreation facilities. There were problems with unemployed youth, needing things to do, needing, to be given ways to be kept active, I guess, in positive ways. And so that was about the only thing I would remember that was related, that could possibly even be called a conflict, was who got the next basketball court, as the money was there or not. And it was just a few $100s each time. It was a matter of pouring concrete and building. Yeah. But that was one of the things I remember as, okay, how do we advocate for our turn? Understand the need well enough to help the commissioner advocate for the next project. Okay. And that was the one I remember the most. I mean, there were others, I'm sure, too, that they were competing for a limited amount of municipal funds.
And basketball courts are still really popular.
They're even more popular from the stories I've heard. I think basketball is certainly a popular topic, especially among my Peace Corps colleagues who were teachers and PE teachers and such.
You mentioned that as part of your role, you had to go out into the village and really get to understand what the needs were. And what was that like, interacting? Were you interacting with families or?
To a degree, interacting with families. In many ways, of course, the best opportunities for that were parties. Family parties. The Peace Corps volunteer in the village would often get invited, for which we were always grateful, to be, and that was a good way to get to know not only the family that invited you, the immediate family, but of course all the extended family, and then there would be friends, and so in the villages there would be a lot of people we could meet through those, and the fiestas every year. The fiesta for the big celebration by the island, by the village, would be, and not only would you meet people from the village, but people would come around to each other's villages, right? And so really, it was just a ticket to go to a lot of parties, right?
You said it, not me, Dennis.
It was. I can't say it was anything.
I'm working tonight from 6 to 11.
That was one way, and of course through our contact, living with a local family, working closely with the family of at least my San Vicente commissioner, I got to know a second family, extended family deeply. One was Carolinian here in Olei, and one was
Who was it,
Chamorro.
may I ask?
Yes, the
who
family
your
was
host been?
Rebalaman, Felix and Joaquina Rebalaman.
Okay.
And in San Vicente it was Prudencio Cabrera was the name of the commissioner, and he had extended family there that I got to know quite well, which was lovely. And it was being welcomed into the families was of course super special, but being embraced by the village, sometimes it was difficult because everybody knew the Peace Corps volunteer, and if they met you once they expect you to remember their name.
Yes.
So that was always challenging, and I was not that great with names, certainly not now, and I wasn't then either, but it still was okay.
Yeah.
Another way was because of the basketball court thing and all of that, I tried to pay attention to going out and meeting the young people that they were concerned about, because I wasn't that much older. I was probably the same age as many of them.
Yeah.
And so there was a term then for young unemployed youth called Seabees.
Oh.
And it came from the Navy Seabees, because apparently they had a bad reputation for looking like they didn't work a lot or something. I don't know. So I would meet the Seabees of the village hanging around, which always had mixed, interesting stories. But it was the attempt to get to know again what could be done with youth programs, because that was a concern, and that was something that we at least could relate to on an age-wise basis a lot more than probably the commissioners could.
What did you enjoy most, other than the parties?
yeah, we'll do that.
What did you enjoy most about your time as a Peace Corps volunteer, or even you decided to stay longer, which we will talk about also, but what did you enjoy most about it?
So again, interactions and getting to know family was good. We did a lot of taking advantage of the beautiful island. I mean, I'd go out. After halfway through my Peace Corps term, I guess I bought a motorcycle, because I had been bicycling before that, which gave a much more mobility to go explore.
You guys couldn't own cars, right?
Technically, no, but one of my fellow volunteers did buy a car, and I didn't stop him. It was a barely operable car that had spent much of its life on yaps.
But motorcycles were okay?
Well, the motorcycles, they didn't stop us from that either.
Okay, so you had a motorcycle.
Yeah, so part of the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, we did go off and explore and enjoy going off and exploring boonies, going to some of the more remote beaches to spearfish. I took up spearfishing like many of us did. And of course, the occasional trip to Managaha with either a family gathering or something like that. We'd get out to Managaha. So we would do things that would be a lot of fun, and enjoy the physical location as well as the social and the cultural aspect of it.
So lucky us, after your Peace Corps term, you decided to stay, and you actually, as I said, had a significant, I would say, contribution to some of our local programs. We'll talk about that after this break.
Okay.
All right.
That would be great.
We'll be back after this break.
Looking for resources about Marianas history, culture, and more? Well, check out the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's collection. Our extensive video, audio, and photographic library can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at 670 Humanities. Or check out the written resources on our website at nmhcouncil.org. And for those who prefer a good book, we also have a selection of local publications for purchase. So, dive in, explore, and share your comments as we navigate the human experience together.
Welcome back. We're chatting with former Peace Corps volunteer Dennis Vander Tuig. Dennis, so you kind of got involved in something at the end of your Peace Corps term that kind of enticed you to come back. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I during our Peace Corps term, we all started finding other things that we liked doing and needed doing in some ways. And because the Village Commissioner program, to be honest, did not keep us always fully employed. Which sort of avoid becoming a CB. I didn't want to become a CB. No.
I was going to say, at
no,
least
we
you were
had
productive.
we had extra time, but we got to know the person in the planning office named Tom Sheehan. He was in this actually the Marianas District Planning Office because it was still the trust territory. And one thing that they needed was there was a historic preservation program started in the trust territory. And I had a history degree, and I was intensely interested in history. And so I was asked if I could help the Marianas do their part in this trust territory program in terms of planning a historic preservation approach and setting up a program for the Marianas. And part of that was beginning to identify the resources in the Marianas that should be registered in the National Register of Historic Places, which is a function that is, well, it was a function of identifying and photographing and documenting places that, should be preserved in some way and finding out what should be preserved. So I did that in the Peace Corps, and that started my interest there. And because of that, as the Commonwealth territory was coming, the plebiscite happened while I was here, so we knew we were moving toward a Commonwealth territory. I was asked if I would consider returning under contract still with the district government of the TTPI, but to continue that work that I was doing, but to help the new Commonwealth government set up a separate program because they would become a separate entity under that program of state historic preservation offices, which I did. I came back because of that interest. In between my Peace Corps time and coming back, I got married. So I brought my wife along to be here. And I worked on the program that I was hired to work on, the Historic Preservation Office, got it established. We had to write grant proposals to the Interior Department, National Park Service to get it going. We had federal grant money to start it. Had to hire an initial staff and to just begin a more formal, separate from the trust territory program on our own. And so doing that, I was appointed the first state historic preservation officer by Governor Camacho at the time.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I mean, we needed to have a state historic preservation officer to do these programs. And so we did that. I did that for, my beginning of my time here.
Yeah.
It was almost 3 years that we were back here. And that's what I was doing. And so, yes, the legacy of the historic preservation program, which I've seen evidence of just yesterday with the proclamation on the beach of Historic Preservation Month, and seeing the State Historic Preservation Officer.
Yeah, so nice that you were here for that.
That was just lovely because it was just a wonderful reading of a proclamation, message from the governor, from the Director of Community and Cultural Affairs, Frank Rebalaman, who happened to be my little brother when I was in Peace Corps. Mm-hmm. So I was able to, see him again and see what's come from that historic preservation program. That was delightful.
What were the priorities for, as we call it, HPO when it started?
So the priorities for HPO were to say, first of all, like I said, identify properties that we could, put in the register, but set up the program that would protect cultural resources, we called them. And in the case that it began to become more obvious was as the island was developed and any construction that would take place, there was the potential to disturb cultural resources. In some cases, it would be ancient Chamorro cultural sites. And other times it would be World War II things that were still significant from the war history, and we'd want to make sure we didn't unduly disturb or not appreciate them before they disappeared. So we had to set up laws and regulations. The law was actually passed after my time when I left. We finally got the law passed to establish the program and some of the protection laws. But there were federal laws. So when federal money was coming in and there was a federal project, there were procedures they had to go through that included protecting and assessing, surveying cultural resources. So partly it was to figure out what were valuable cultural resources, protect them from undue damage, and encourage, the appreciation of them in any way we could, which was just get the word out, what was appreciated or not. And it was somewhat dicey sometimes. But
Why is that?
because, number one, with ancient cultural resources, people have sensitivities around places that, that were known to have been ancient people living there. Things dealing with World War II, I thought things were a long time ago because I was young, but there were people on this island for whom World War II was a very painful memory. So you had to be real careful about, what we did with World War II resources and how we talked about them, in all honesty. So that was part of it. The other part of what I did is advocated in Washington, advocated with other territorial island representatives in that program for paying attention to the unique needs of places like this. In the States, the Historic Preservation Program was often all about preserving old buildings and remodeling them restoring them for something. Here, there weren't that many buildings that survived the war that were of the right age to be considered historic properties. So we had to educate them on the importance of non-tangible cultural resources in need of preservation too. And so that it was perfectly valid to talk about preserving location of an oot, of the canoes that would sail up from Satawal while we were here, the cultural practices, do whatever we could to acknowledge that importance somehow too. And so,
I think nowadays people are especially with westernization, people are very aware of the importance of preserving the indigenous Chamorro and Carolinian culture. Did people kind of have that perspective even back then in the 70s, like, we could lose this, we need to get serious, or was it kind of like,
there were people who did, and there were many people who feared for their children that weren't exempt, weren't showing that same passion for the past. And that was the other lesson to learn. We weren't just there to freeze things in time, too. You couldn't just keep everything the way it was. That was not what the intent should be. And people wanted to go to the States to learn new things. They wanted the new things to come in from the States after the Commonwealth came into being, and there was a lot more exchange going on. So you had to be also sensitive to that balance and the tension within the people of the Marianas about, we don't need to save the old, we want to go find the new. And so that was, and I find right now, coming back, I think there is a much broader and deeper appreciation from the people I've met, the young people I've met involved in the Historic Preservation Program and the Arts Festival, the people we met there. There is a deep appreciation that is solid, and it makes me so happy to know that, because it's not a frozen in time at all. It's a living, growing, keeping the appreciation going and finding new ways to express it.
So you mentioned the Flame Tree Arts Festival, which is organized by the Commonwealth Council of Arts and Culture, which you also had a hand in creating.
Correct. Because I was in this planning office I mentioned earlier, as we transitioned to the Commonwealth. It wasn't just the State Historic Preservation Officer program, but it was other government agencies saying, now that you're a territory, a Commonwealth territory, you are eligible for participating in other things. And one of the first things that came in was a communication from the National Endowment for the Arts saying, now that you are there, you are eligible for money and a grant from us to start a state arts agency, a Commonwealth arts agency. And so it came probably to the governor's office. I don't know how those communications came in. And things like that were often handed down to the planning office, because that was sort of planning the new things and the transitions. And it was kind of like, anybody want to take this one on? We have an opportunity to do an arts agency development. And I raised my hand. My wife, Mary, is an artist. She was an illustrator for Smithsonian for many, many years, and actually was still doing illustration work here on the island. And we had met some other people that were involved in arts, and local people who were involved in a lot of local art, handicraft stuff, whatever. And we said, let's see what we can pull together for a case to start a state arts agency here in Marianas. So we did that. We called it our night job, an unpaid night job, basically.
On the days you weren't Oh, well, you weren't partying anymore because you weren't in
Oh,
Peace
and
Corps.
partying anymore. I was actually working harder. No, I wasn't out learning about the village anymore. So we took that on, and we wrote the first grant and got the approval from the National Endowment to submit the next grant, which would be, again, to set up an office and have the money for staffing and getting going, and received a sizable grant the second year. And so from there, the story goes on without us, because that was about the time we left the island. We had been here for 3 years. And one thing that we vowed, was programs that we were involved in, the community and cultural affairs type programs, historic preservation, and then the arts agency, were programs that should not long have expatriates running them. They should be handed off to, I had a colleague, a deputy state historic preservation officer, Just Pangilinan, who handed off the program, and he became the state historic preservation officer. And in the arts agency case, we handed it off first to an expat who came through saying she was an arts planner and an arts administrator, and then from there it's now been handed off, of course, to be a totally, locally run, or whoever the local population is now, which is, so that all came about that way. And it's so wonderful to see little tiny seed corns that we planted have flourished, continue to grow, and certainly in the case of the Arts Festival, Flame Tree Arts Festival. And it's still very much focused on local art and culture driving all of the effort. So, and of course, local arts and culture have considerably expanded and become more varied on Saipan. A different blend.
Medias.
Different blend, a blend of different cultures and countries now. Kind of a turnover from lots of Micronesian districts and different people here to different countries, and expanded.
We're quite international now.
Very international.
Could I ask you, what are some of the traditional crafts or arts that were being produced back then in the 70s?
So there were storyboards by at least one individual I knew on the island that would do storyboards. There were the beginnings of the dance groups. They were beginning to start doing some of the dances and chants. In different, there were the Carolinian dances and things that celebrated when the Satawalis would sail in. There were Chamorro dances and Chamorro, dance troops beginning, and music. There's always the music of people composing local songs or adapting local songs or whatever. So music was a part of almost every party, in terms of someone picking up a ukulele or something and beginning to sing, and people would sing along. And music is near and dear to my heart anyway. I like music, and so that was another thing. There were crafts. I mean, the crafts like the baskets, the different baskets that were woven. There were crafts like and wonderful crafts like marmar making. The beautiful things that were kind of unique. But there were also, and there were people who had brought in art programs into the schools. Children were learning art, different kinds of art. It was not just indigenous cultural types, but they were learning all kinds of other art projects and learning how to do, quote, Western art, but whatever. But it was painting, and there were some people on the island that were doing things like that. So, but nothing coordinated and collected into necessarily a formal appreciation of that. One of the people we worked with was actually a weaver from Finland who had come to Micronesia and was learning all about indigenous, plant material and weaving on the island. And so she was both an external, interesting perspective, but also a very good internal look into one niche type of cultural, one art form, basically.
Coming back now 50 years later, what would you say makes the Marianas and its people unique in the world?
Unique in the world.
I know, we didn't discuss this question before we started.
No, we didn't, but no, that's great. I mean, it hit me with the Hofadai Theater signs in the airport, right? It was like, okay, this is familiar home territory, and I have not seen it enough in the past 50 years. And the warm welcoming is just really good. The thoughtful very competent, I have to call it competent management of your affairs in the island. It is a thoughtful embrace of a new modern way that has continued to get here since I left. But again, like I said, there seems to be even a deeper appreciation and more comfortable appreciation, I guess, of the cultural background. Appreciating that that's valuable and not being either ashamed of it as you try to become more like another country, America in those days, now it probably is any country, but also people, actively embracing and promoting and defending. I bumped into people who are really strong advocates of indigenous people and indigenous ways. I've met people who are very young and just beginning to appreciate how they can play a role in that, and that's just gratifying. But there's just there's a core of, number one, the same friendliness, the same hospitality, the same embrace into families that we got when we were Peace Corps volunteers. Everybody in our group has just been amazed by the embrace we've received just generally from going around the island, people remembering Peace Corps, the official welcomes we've gotten from the governor and from the mayor and from all the people that we've met welcoming us back to the island. I mean, it reinforces what Peace Corps was all about. It was us getting to come and appreciate and learn and be embraced by a culture of a different place, but also to have Peace Corps strengthening just the ties and just helping. Hopefully, we presented a reasonable picture of America, that we didn't cause people to dislike Americans.
I think you may have done something right.
Yeah. And most powerfully of all, there's 3 goals to Peace Corps they always talk about. The one that says, bring the world back home. And so I don't know about all the others. From what I gather from my seeing them, they all brought the world back home and
They've kind of
the
said
value
that.
of what we learned here.
Yeah.
I told people many, many times that Peace Corps was one of the most valuable things I did, because it taught me how to truly see people through their eyes. See through other people's eyes, looking back at myself. Because I came here and I had to learn a culture that I was not a part of. I was the outsider, and I never was felt to feel unwelcome because of that. And that taught me a lesson about how to make people feel comfortable from where they are and approach them from where they are in whatever I do.
It's a great life lesson.
It's a great life lesson, and it was applied many times over, and I found different ways to express that to different people I dealt with, or people I worked with, or people who worked for me, or whatever. I always taught that lesson everywhere I could. That some people would ask me, well, would you ever recommend people going to Peace Corps? And without a hesitation, I'd say, yes, go do it. It's the most valuable thing you'll ever do. So.
Well, thank you for your time today and for sharing stories with us. And for the seeds that you planted that continue to bear fruit today. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, I think I gave one of my final thoughts with what I've learned about people. The other final thought would simply be that, I hope that everything will continue to develop and evolve and grow and be something that the island stays keeping the character, that, the valuable character, but also finds new ways to somehow spread to the world what is the heart of the Marianas, and the soul that makes us want to come back now.
100% agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Yeah. Our guest today has been Dennis Vander Tuig. He's a former Peace Corps volunteer here in the Marianas in the 1970s, part of our series of former Peace Corps volunteers that have recently returned. This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.